Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today we're going to be talking about the Ordinariate, which has multiple titles these days because there's 3 Ordinariates. My understanding is at the moment one in England, Scotland, and Wales, one in the United States and Canada, and then one in Australia. So, on to discuss this topic is Christian B. Wagner, who runs an apostolate called Scholastic Answers. You basically deal with all different types of Thomism and sort of the defense of Thomism and advocating Thomism's use in theology today. Does that sum up right?
Yeah, that's about right. You're actually cutting out just a little bit, so let me see if it's your internet or my internet. I think it's my internet. Things look fine now, but yeah, basically just straight line traditional Thomism. That's kind of what I would like to see. I think that would be able to help out people the most, even on the lay level, because this is actually sort of little known fact is actually St. Thomas was regarded during his lifetime as especially being a teacher who could reach both the learned and then also have a certain like simple profundity to a speech to be able to teach laymen. It was something that St. Thomas was known for, and St. Thomas's works were known for. And there's actually some in the commentorial tradition, such as John of St. Thomas. He did things like that. Garrigou Lagrange is a famous one who did things like that. But yeah, I think that Thomistic theology and philosophy can be actually very useful for laymen as well as for theologians. Although unfortunately, the theologians have kind of abandoned it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you coming on to discuss the Ordinariate. And I very much appreciate your work and your when you had your your Discord up and running massively. You had a massive Discord. I know it's sort of decreased in size because it's now behind paywall, right? That's what it is.
Yeah, I needed to. What I needed to do is I kind of needed to keep it to like. I wanted to keep it to like about 100 people, so I invited some people who I'd known for a really long time, and then I was just like, okay, patron only, so I can kind of deal with whatever's going on. Because I mean, you're like when you kind of have something like a Discord connected to your name, and then I didn't have much time to mod anything, and it was like, oh, you have people in there like talking about things that would get your YouTube channel taken down if I mention, and it's like it's not a good look. So I kind of had to be like, look, guys, I can't mod it. You guys are just acting insane, and I just need to keep it more private, sort of thing.
Yeah, understandable. Well, so are you a convert to the Catholic faith, or are you a cradle Catholic?
I'm a convert. So when it comes to my background, I had converted to just a sort of normal flavor of Protestantism. That if you wanted to class, it'd be like a charismatic sort of a form of Protestantism. So that was junior year of high school for me. And then as I got into the faith, I had before that for a very long time been very interested in studying. So I wanted to study theology, and I wanted to figure out what was going on. And my parents, they had my grandfather. He's a Baptist pastor, but they had sort of been in the like broad MacArthurite, John MacArthur following stream sort of thing, and they also had some sort of knowledge of like R.C. Sproul and that sort of thing. So when I went and I asked them, I'm like, hey, I kind of want to get serious about religion. Like, what should I read about? And they were like, oh, your grandfather, he likes this guy and this guy. You can start reading their stuff. So I started to. My parents bought me one of the MacArthur Study Bibles. I think I still have it. I guess it's not on my shelf. But I think it might be in storage. They got me a MacArthur Study Bible, which has like little study notes on them, explaining verses and such. And that thing, I just absolutely brutalized it with my underlining. It's I went through a lot of it. I probably read most of it because I mean I had certain like religious interests when I was younger, so I was very familiar just because of the culture of my parents, who were, I guess you could describe them as like fundamentalist Baptist, but not in like the really, really sort of strict way, but kind of like a little fundamentalist, which I guess is like a really, that's how my grandfather at least would describe himself when I asked him like, hey, how would you like describe yourself? Because that's sort of weird for Protestants, is they don't like describing themselves. But all that to say, I was very, very familiar with the scope and content of sacred scripture from a very young age. And then, so that it wasn't too hard for me to go to sacred scripture and start asking myself, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? Like, how do they connect, sort of thing. So that mixed with some stuff from R.C. Sproul, I started listening to his videos and sermons and stuff like that. I started following podcast, and that's sort of how I got interested. I was buying books, and I actually figured out that they had started a college as well. And at this point, I was kind of directing myself towards wanting to go into ministry. I was an intern at like my local church, and I did a bunch of stuff because when I kind of hit stuff, I want to hit it and I want to get it and do it the best I can. So that's kind of how I went into religion as well. So I decided to go to college at the college that he started, which got me interested in a group of theologians known as the Reformed Scholastics. So when it comes to the Reformed Scholastics, this is like the generation after like your Calvin, Luther, Melanchthon, Bucer, Oecolampadius, whoever you want to say. That's like the generation after them that started actually writing in a more Catholic manner, so a manner which drew from the medievals and the church fathers. So that kind of started this massive rabbit hole to where I started studying St. Thomas Aquinas, because these you talk to these people and they're like, well, St. Thomas, his doctrine of God is like the best, so you're going to want to read the Summa. So I'm like, okay, I'll read the Summa. So I picked up the Summa. I started reading that. That caused a lot of questions in my mind, which got me interested in some of the Counter-Reformation theologians. So like Suarez, Banya, not Banyas at that point, but Suarez, Bellarmine, St. Francis de Sales, and theologians like that. So I started reading them. Eventually got introduced into the Manualist tradition, which is a whole nother can of worms. But all this to say is really, I kind of got this ball rolling. And then eventually at the point in which I was discerning very seriously whether to convert, I was actually by that point an Anglican, because right when I went to college, I was like, I kind of want to, now that I've started becoming interested in the broader Catholic tradition, I started getting interested in things like liturgy. Which obviously, if you're going to go to your normal Presbyterian or Baptist church, you're not going to really find something that's more Catholic in liturgy. And I'm using Catholic in the like weird Protestant broad sense of the term.
Yeah, the lowercase c.
Yeah, lowercase c Catholic. But yeah, so I started getting like introduced to all of those things. So I became an Anglican. I was an ordinand at the time. For those who don't know, an ordinand is somebody who goes, who's basically studying for orders, so studying for the priesthood. And I was actually very close to my diaconal ordination by the time I left. Yeah, but I was an ordinand in the diocese, and finally, I decided that I just had to become Roman Catholic, and I couldn't. The coping, basically the coping must stop, sort of thing. Is at that point I had imbibed so many different doctrines that were very clearly Roman, and yeah, that and like sort of another thing that you get, and I try to describe this to people, but a lot of people like really do not understand what I'm saying. But you have to sort of recognize that at that stage, sort of in my formation in theology, I'd read like a lot of some of the best sort of Protestant theology out there when it came to the Reformed Scholastic period. And then you just like go and find out that something like the Cursus Theologicus of the Samontacenses, or like the Sacrae Theologiae Summa of the BAC, that they exist. And there's just these like insanely massive, very erudite works that just like kick butt in every single way possible. And then you see these things and you read them, and you read like one of their theses on a disputed point between Protestants, and they're distinguishing what they mean so very clearly. They're showing it from the sources of theology, from Scripture in a very strict syllogistic form, from the fathers, from the theologians, from theological reasoning. And you're reading this, and you're just like, it feels like the Protestant side's throwing out some like petty difficulties and objections that you can resolve with the distinctions they give, and then the Catholic side is just at least the Catholic scholastic side is just showing extremely clearly that they're right. So yeah, at that sort of point, once I started reading into those figures, it just kind of like was very, very, very clear to me. But eventually, there was sort of a time where it was very clear to me, but I still didn't want to convert for more or less psychological reasons, because it's like, well, I kind of want to do this whole priesthood thing that I've been studying for the last few years, and kind of be like this or that, and then finally, I guess grace just kind of broke through and decided that I needed to convert. So yeah, that's sort of my background. But yes, I was a convert, and I was actually like an Anglican ordinand who was like training to say mass and stuff like that.
Okay, that's pretty cool. And what was the Church of England, or sorry, would it be Episcopalian? Was it Episcopalian church?
It was the Anglican Church in North America. So back in there's really, and I'll keep this quick, but there's really like three main branches of American Anglicanism. So you have the Episcopal Church. Actually, I'd say there's four branches. So you have the Episcopal Church, which was the one brought over from the Church of England to America, that whole fun thing. And then you have in the 19th century of something called the Oxford movement, or the Anglo-Catholic movement, of figures like John Henry Newman. People usually recognize John Henry Newman's name. He was one of the guys who actually started the Oxford movement, and then he eventually obviously converted to Roman Catholicism. But because of this Oxford movement, you had these wings of the church. So before, you had like basically people who were Reformed. You had the evangelicals, who could be like sort of weird Arminian type belief. And then you have, on the other hand, the latitudinarians, which were basically like your theological liberals that they had. So you had like a bunch of people in the Church of England back then, like denying the Nicene definition of the Trinity, and they were allowed to like continue to be. It was insane, honestly. Like, I get why the Oxford movement did what they did, and I feel like all of like the grouchy Reformed types that are like, oh, the Oxford movement was so bad. Like, you guys don't know how bad things really were back in the Church of England during that time. But all that's to say, from this, you had like you had the ritualist movement, which was a very high sort of Anglo-Catholicism that was like celebrating Latin masses and stuff, which was just like 40 years prior, you couldn't even like light a candle on the altar without being called a Romanist. And like the Oxford movement guys were still wearing weren't even wearing like our sacrificial vestments. And then you had guys who were like, yes, Latin masses in Anglican churches. These guys were like thrown in jail for doing it. It's an insane story. But because of this, you have a very strong sort of fission within Anglicanism between these two wings of the sort of the evangelicals, who would identify themselves very strongly with Protestantism. And then you have the Anglo-Catholics, which basically turned into a party which was very strongly identified themselves with Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. So in America, this sort of move to some of the clergy in America, where you had now Anglo-Catholics within the Episcopal Church. So groups of clergy in America got mad at that, and they decided to break off and start what's called the REC, so the Reformed Episcopal Church. And that was the first of the breaks within the American Anglican Church. And then it's not for another 100 years. This was like 1870s. So the 1970s, you have what are called the Philadelphia. Is it Philadelphia 8 or Philadelphia 11? But you had a group of women who were ordained in Philadelphia by a retired Episcopalian bishop. And at this point, everybody just like flips their lid and they're like, okay, let's like basically just like obliterate this bishop and these women like in public and just like epically own them. But there was one erudite bishop in the House of Bishops who convinced the other, like this was the dumbest move ever. They convinced the other bishops that the ordination was valid, which like almost every single canonist before that, going all the way, like St. Thomas Aquinas writes about this interestingly, like canonists for like a very, very long time said that you can't ordain women. They're defective matter for ordination, and it would be an invalid, not merely an illicit, but an invalid ordination. But this bishop convinced the other bishops through more or less tricky means that these were merely illicit ordinations. So they just suspended the women from their ministry rather than excommunicating them and saying, like, you're not priests. So this led to a cascade of like liberal infiltration, like Taylor Marshall style infiltration, but in the Episcopal Church. From this, they finally in 1977 allowed female ordination in the Episcopal Church. So this led everybody to just like flip their lids. And a group of Anglicans decided to break off, and they're like, yeah, we can't be in union with those with a bunch of like invalid women priests. So they break off. And after breaking off, they start this movement called the Continuing Movement to continue the Anglican faith in America. And in true Anglican fashion, within like 4 years, this group had split off to 20 denominations. I'm not joking. It's like,
oh my.
Yeah, they broke off into like they first broke off into 4 groups, and this caused them to break off into like a bunch of different other groups. So yeah,
Wow.
there was this massive sort of like fragmentation within this continuing movement, which still continues actually to this day. You can still find continuing Anglican churches. They're together in what's called the G3. So they're trying to get back together into like union to like one denomination still, and it's been like 50 years. But
who has authority? Isn't that what they're going to argue about?
What the crazy thing is my former Anglican priest used to call it purple fever, is because in the Anglican Church, bishops wear purple cassocks rather than black cassocks. So everybody wanted to be a bishop is basically what happened. So you'd have like it's insane because you'd have these dioceses with like 5 congregations, and each of these congregations maybe had like 50 laymen. So you'd have like a bishop over 250 laymen and like 5 priests. It's like, what? Like in the Catholic Church, we have like small groups larger than your diocese. Like it's insane, really. But yeah, so that happened, and a lot of Anglicans were like, look, we're going to stay in, we're going to stay conservative, we're going to stay faithful, like recognize and resist, I guess is the best way of you guys thinking about it. So they had their funneled recognize and resist movement, which lasted until 2007. And finally in 2007, what sparked it? I think there was like something gay that happened. I can't remember. It's either gay or women. One of the two happened within the Anglican Communion.
The trans hadn't come yet.
Yeah, it wasn't trans yet, so it couldn't be gay and woman. I guess it could be gay and woman, even if it isn't trans. But they decided to just break off and start what's called GAFCON, so the Global Anglican Futures Conference, which is actually quite large. And I think off the top of my head, it might be larger than the Anglican Communion now.
Yeah, isn't it mostly like African too?
Yeah, that's what leads to most of their population. Because most of the GAFCON groups in the Western countries are still pretty small, and then Africa they just have a lot of the global South. They have a lot of people, which is kind of funny because they elected like a white dude from Georgia to be the first leader of GAFCON. Yeah,
Bold.
Archbishop Foley Beach. Yeah, I know, it was weird. It's like elect the head of like one of the smallest groups within there, just because he's Western. Like, okay, I guess that's how it works.
Interesting.
But yeah, they
But
broke off, and the American version of this, long story short, is the ACNA, the Anglican Church in North America, and that's where I was a part of.
okay, and so basically, the craziness actually started in America regarding Anglican ordinations and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't actually until the '90s that the Church of England started ordaining women.
Okay, yeah. So okay, so you were part of the sort of conservative Anglicans, and
That's like not even really, because
okay,
my diocese, and we fought about this a lot. And I was obviously solidly against it as an arch conservative. But my diocese, my bishop actually ordained women. Like
okay.
yeah, I think his daughter like was going for orders or something like that. Yeah, it was like, yeah. So
Well,
like, yeah, this is your conservative Anglican moment for you.
well, did you say you got kicked out of some seminary of some sort because
Yeah, yeah, that did happen. Yeah, I I don't know how much detail to put on this, because they have pretty deep pockets. So I've usually kept the details
Okay.
pretty under the radar, because I don't want to get like some stupid lawsuit or something. I don't know. Heck knows what I signed to get into that place. Yeah, I got accused of heretical theses, and one of the main one was actually baptismal regeneration, which is kind of ridiculous, because the Anglican formularies affirm that baptism. Basically, the Anglican formularies affirm baptismal regeneration. So I, as like an Anglican ordinand, am bound to hold to the Anglican formularies, which are like kind of like the Anglican Confession, which would be the Book of Common Prayer, the Ordinal, the 39 Articles, and then the Book of Homilies are sometimes added. But it's like I had to hold that, and then they're just like, "Well, that's actually heretical," and I'm like, "You're calling like," because the Lutherans believe this too. So you're calling the biggest like branches of the Reformation heretical right now. This is ridiculous. And then they booted me. So yeah, that was the whole story behind that.
Yeah, but it's just interesting because I wouldn't even imagine Anglicans calling each other heretical.
Yeah, well, the school I was going to, it wasn't an Anglican seminary; it was a Reformed seminary. So,
Oh, okay. Then that might make more
but
sense.
Anglicans calling each other heretical, though, is not it's not an innovation at all. They do it all the
Okay.
time.
Okay. Well, I just thought it seems like everything goes, generally speaking. That's at least that's my perception
Yeah,
of
that's what
Anglicanism.
it is kind of it's kind of weird how to even like define Anglicanism. And this is a problem that you'll get within Anglican circles, where they fight each other to the death over. Because what you have is, from the very beginning of Anglicanism, it's like you don't really have a solid doctrine. You have a doctrinal body in the 39 Articles in the Book of Homilies, and all of these formularies. Yeah, so you have a doctrinal body, but it's like, in reality, ever since the beginning, there was this interpretive method, and this especially becomes clear with the in the late 17th century and the 18th century, is you have this method of interpretation that's basically like, as long as you can kind of fit it into the words, it's okay. So it's like, for example, an example of this is if you read Tract 90, which was written by St. John Henry Newman back when he was Anglican. And it's like, okay, well, the 39 Articles, it says we reject the Romish doctrine of purgatory. And you'll say, well, it says we reject the Romish doctrine of purgatory. So
No,
I
no.
can still hold the like apostolic doctrine of purgatory. And it'd be like quibbling like this.
Yeah.
And the bishops were just like, meh, nah, I guess it's okay. You can keep doing what you're doing. But yeah, this was just so it's really hard to say like, okay, what is Anglicanism? Because personally, like if you press me on it, I'll be like, yeah, those guys aren't Anglicans, because the term Anglican itself was used for centuries before the Reformation. This
Oh
just
yeah.
means an English Catholic, or even like an Englishman of any sort. So it's like, yeah, I am an Anglican. You guys are not Anglicans. You guys are really Henryists, if you want to put it like that, or however else you want to put it. I don't care what you guys call yourself, but you guys are not Anglicans.
Are they even Henryists?
No, not really, because Henry, his only thing was he followed a man named Marcellus of Padua's political theory. So really, Henry's only error was political. It wasn't really anything else.
I mean, didn't he say that you need to only receive in like one kind, and that I mean there were a bunch of different things that almost seem traditional.
Yeah, he basically held to everything of Catholic dogma, except he kind of didn't think the Pope had certain authority that he did. So yeah, his errors were political and ecclesiological, if anything, which is like really weird back then to even think about ecclesiology. I like to do my excuses for Henry, because I think a lot of the common narratives are pretty bad surrounding Henry. But it's like to even talk about like Catholic ecclesiology back in the early 16th century is like is a bit crazy, because most of our ecclesiology was developed in response to Protestantism. But I mean, before that, yes, you do have like the Council of Constance making certain condemnations of conciliarism, but it's like back then, like even recognize what was defined versus what was not was like really, really awkward. And this is why you get guys like Cajetan denying the canon that was already defined at the Council of Florence. And it's like, how, dude, you're a cardinal of the church. And like Florence wasn't that long ago. Florence was within 100 years of I mean, actually, when was the Council of Florence? It was in, it ended in 1449. So it's like Cajetan was born in what, the 1460s, 1470s. Yeah, so it's like it's within like that would be like for us like something that happened in the 1980s, and you just like 1469, so 20 years after it finished. So it's like something happened like in the 1980s, and we're just like, yeah, we don't know that's defined. Like, what do you mean you don't know it's defined? Like, this was like there were people alive during the Council of Florence that you like knew growing up. Like, how do you not know this? This was like a generation before you.
Yeah,
but yeah, it gets super awkward, like whether things were defined and how were they defined. But it's very clear. The one thing that's very clear is he severely erred when it came to the authority of the Pope in ecclesiological manners. Like, nobody in their right mind could say that it was like okay within Catholic dogma back then to say that like a king would be the head of the church. Like that was just like it's crazy. That was crazy to say back then.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole thing with Henry. But when you came into the church, did you come into sort of the sort of Novus Ordo, or type of parish, or did you come into the regular diocese, or did you come in through the Ordinariate?
Yeah, so when I first converted, at least when I first decided to convert, the next morning, because this happened like in the after, it was like a moment. It's kind of weird as a moment, but like the next morning, I called the the Ordinariate headquarters in Houston, and I talked to the vocations director for them, and I was like, hey, this is my situation. Like, when I joined the Catholic Church, am I going to be a seminarian? That's what I was wondering about. Like, am I going to transfer, be a seminarian, and like become a Catholic priest? That's what I was curious about. And he's like, no, we canonically we don't do that anymore. It's interesting because the UK and Australia do it. So if I was in the UK or Australia, I would probably be a seminarian right now. But since we're in America, Bishop Lopes, and I think he's done this correctly. I absolutely think he's done this correctly. But Bishop Lopes, he does not accept seminarians as seminarians. Only deacons as deacons and priests as priests. So yeah, that's the first thing I did. After that, I was put in contact with an ordinariate parish near Charlotte, which is near where I live now. I used to be in Florida, working in the diocese, the Anglican diocese down there. But now I'm up in North Carolina. So yeah, I got into contact with one of he's I think did he already get ordained or he's getting ordained this month. But he's Deacon Joshua Johnson. He will be Father Joshua Johnson here soon, or maybe he already has. It's just been crazy for me, so I haven't been paying attention. But so I got into contact with him, and he's like, "Look, this is since you already were a seminarian and you've already clearly like read your way into the church and things like that. We're gonna like go over the catechism very broadly and have a few meetings where we can just meet and discuss whatever you feel like discussing. But we're not like really going to do like an RCIA sort of thing. So it was about, I want to say like 6 months after I decided to convert that I was received, which for most is relatively quick. But the ordinariate is able to have some flexibility with discerning where people are, where a normal like Novus Ordo diocesan sort of program isn't going to be able to do that. So yeah, that's I was received into the ordinariate in Athens, Georgia. That's where the nearest parish was, because technically the one near Charlotte just became a parish.
Oh, okay.
Back then it was just a community who met for mass once a month. So yeah, I was received into the Catholic Church down in Athens, Georgia. So yeah, that was fun. But yeah, I'm ordinariate. I pray the ordinariate office. I don't go to ordinariate mass because the parish is like 2 hours away. So theoretically, I make it there once a month, but usually it's a lot less than that, just because of the drive. But yeah, that's kind of what I do. So yeah, I'm very thoroughly ordinariate. I'm not just like, yeah, I was kind of like received into the ordinariate, or like, yeah, I was former Anglican, so I guess I kind of identify with it. Like, no, canonically, I am ordinariate.
Gotcha. And are most of these people at the church you would go to when when you can make it up there, are they converts?
Uh, every single one of them.
Okay.
That's actually, if anybody's watching and you like you want to financially support work that goes to um, like basically helping converts, or ministering to converts, or somehow bringing people into the Catholic Church. Like, don't give your money to Catholic Answers. They trust me, they're already swelled with it. Don't give money to whoever. Give money to your local ordinariate parish. They really you're giving money to priests who are converts, who have a lot of kids, and they're making ends meet in that way. A lot of these guys I know, very hard workers, are working around the clock because they're both priests and fathers of children. So it's like these guys are just insane with the type of hours they put in, and they're serving a bunch of converts, and each of these people you meet, it'll be like, yeah, I joined in, I don't know, I joined in 2019, and here are like the 5 other people that I've also got to join since I've joined. It's like, yeah, these people are definitely very, very apostolic, both lay and clergy. It's really, really a really, really good area of the church to support. Your local Novus Ordo parish, they have boomer money keeping them up, but yeah, it's like kind of the wild west in the ordinariate. You kind of eat what you kill there. So definitely they need the money. They're very appreciative of the money. So definitely um, if you have the means, or if you want to switch to that, definitely if you want your money actually like making huge impacts, then definitely consider an ordinariate parish.
Awesome. Yeah. Can you take us through the sort of the creation of the ordinary? What was the mindset behind
Mm.
that?
Yeah, a lot of people misunderstand it, and I've gotten into a lot of fights online with people because basically the way in which a lot of people think about the ordinariate is like my and I think this is actually a very damaging reputation, and this is what causes people, when I tell the story of my conversion, they're like, well, why didn't they just let you in as a seminarian? Like, why didn't they do that? Like, that's like sort of mean of them to do. And I'm like, no, this is not the purpose of the ordinariate. But the ordinariate is meant to basically be a pastoral provision. So what's like a pastoral provision? It isn't something that's meant to like be my based in trad like Sarum right English expression of Catholicism. That's not what it's meant to do. It's not meant to like kind of be like an Eastern Catholic sort of thing where we keep alive the Anglican tradition. That's not its purpose. Really, what an ordinariate is and what a pastoral provision is it is meant to condescend to the weakness of us Anglican converts. That's really what it's meant for. Is we and I particularly have this actually, which is why I still pray the same office that I prayed as a seminarian that I was bound to pray. So I we have certain attachments to certain liturgical practices. So the office and also the masses, we have a certain cadence to our liturgy, a certain way in which pastoral relationships between priests and congregants are. Like it would be a little bit odd for you to like, I don't know, go out for Sunday lunch with your priest after mass at a Novus Ordo parish. But that would be something completely normal for an Anglican to expect. It's like, well, the priest is gonna go out to lunch with somebody if he's invited. And it's like, but at a Novus Ordo, that would be like a really weird request. Like, what are you talking about, bro? I got mass to celebrate in like 45 minutes. So like, yeah, there's like that's a very like different cultural thing. It is like when I was a seminarian, like you kind of were expected to do things like that with the people who are under your charge. It's a lot more of an intimate relationship between priest and congregation. So yeah, there's pastoral differences, there's liturgical differences, there's preaching differences as well. Like our homilies are just different with the way in which we preach. I guess some ways, although it gets dangerous here to say like in some ways, like theological expressions are a bit different. The way in which we do theology is a tad different, although you have to be very careful with making that statement. So due to all of these differences, and Pope Benedict in Anglican Ordinariate, if you want to read like really the document about the ordinations, Anglican Ordinariate, but Benedict XVI says that our liturgical practices they're a gift to the church. There's certain good expressions there. It nourishes. It has the ability to nourish the faithful. So, in order to condescend to our weaknesses and the various attachments that we have, like for me personally, if I've done it before, I've tried to make the switch, and I've spent months doing the other. It's just like really difficult. If I wanted to like switch to the liturgy of the hours, or even like the pre-Vatican II Roman breviary, to make that switch would just be like very, very difficult for me because I'm just like so used to it. Like this was something that my wife and I were praying morning and evening prayer before we even were engaged. We were still dating. We have 2 kids now, so it's been like a while that I've been doing this every morning, every evening, morning and evening prayer, in a certain way, praying the same prayers that like are just etched into my memory now. And to make that switch, like some of these guys have been Anglican since they were kids, and they're like in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So it's like to make that switch would be very damaging to their spiritual health. So Rome has condescended and allowed us to keep some of these good aspects, obviously cleansing it from the various errors that have accrued within the Anglican, within the Henrian schism, if you want to put it like that. But yeah, these are pastoral provisions which are meant to keep the faith alive in the faithful. I want to put this carefully, but it isn't meant to be like a sui juris church. It's really the ordinariate. In order for it to achieve its end, the best would be to convert all of the Anglicans and then to eventually find itself to have no more need. So to kind of wean people in the ordinariate back onto how things are usually done in the Roman Rite. So this is why like clerical celibacy is still the ordinary practice within even the ordinariate. The seminarians in the ordinariate who become priests, they all are celibate. We don't somehow like take the normal Anglican practice, because this is meant to be like a pastoral measure in order to help people who were in the Anglican Church. And actually, what's good with the Ordinariate as well is also it's a sort of helpful it's a helpful way to bring in some of the good aspects of, and this is what Benedict talks about, is bring in some of the good aspects of the Anglican tradition, and especially of the ritualist tradition I was talking about earlier, because they've made a lot of these impacts. Bring them into larger English-speaking Catholicism. Like, it would be great if you've ever heard an Ordinariate Mass and heard the Gloria in Excelsis Deo chanted in the way of Murbeck. Like, you listen to that and you're just like, man, this just rips your soul like straight into heaven when you hear this. But then you hear like your normal Novus Ordo rendition. It's just like, this is kind of like corny, uninspiring, and yeah, it feeds the faith of a lot of people. Sure, but objectively speaking, it could be better. It could be better. So I feel like that's also another aspect that that I've heard from higher authorities within the Ordinariate, and then also from Rome itself when it comes to the purpose behind the Ordinariate. Yeah. So that I hope that dispels a lot of misunderstandings. It's just not meant to be like a it's not meant to be a sort of permanent option to bring in some archaeologically reconstruct a bunch of stuff from Sarum Bright Catholicism. It's not like how like Western Orthodoxy is, because that's what Western Orthodoxy is. Western Orthodoxy and Anglican Ordinariate, they are very, very, very different things. Western Orthodoxy, it's meant to archaeologically reconstruct what came before the Reformation. Anglican Ordinariate is meant to cleanse what's present in the Anglican Church in order to keep alive and to help the faith of Anglican converts grow. It's not meant to like replace the Novus Ordo in England or anything like that.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been sort of times when there's been a push for the return of the Sarum Rite. So that is not part of sort of the end goal of the Ordinariate?
No, the Ordinariate is purely pastoral, and I feel like when I get into discussions, and I guess I never asked about what your personal opinions were about this, so I might be trolling you right now. I don't know it, but yeah, when I get into discussions with a lot of people who are just like, yeah, we really love the Sarum, so cool. The Sarum does this, the Sarum does that, and like, yeah, I think the Sarum's cool. And I honestly, I would really like an occasional dispensation for the Sarum to be practiced for cultural purposes. I think that's a really good thing. I think that would be really cool to bring it back into like occasional use. But really, the purpose behind the Ordinariate is meant for the faithful. It's meant to feed the faithful with familiar bread that has been cleansed of its errors by Rome, by the watchful eye of Holy Mother Church. So if you're gonna like have all of these like Anglican grandmas who are now like interested in Catholicism, and they're priests who have been their priests their entire life. This is actually like in the English the Our Lady of Walsingham, which I actually have an Our Lady of Walsingham statue back there. But Our Lady of Walsingham is usually a lot more familiar with this, is you get entire parishes moving over, because it would be very traumatic for a lot of these people who have grown up in this parish. Their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents for the last like 300 years have been going to this single like small town English parish. And then you're telling these people, in order to convert, you have to, like, I know like your great-grandma's buried like on this plot at this parish, but just like give it up and just go to like the Novus Ordo down the street. Like that would be like a very like spiritually traumatic thing for a lot of these people to go through. So it's like, no, what we're going to do is your priest, you're going to have the same priest. He's going to be a Catholic priest now. You're going to have the sort of a similar liturgy. You're going to have this, even if you're very lucky, the same building. You're going to have a lot of the familiar things. So just go and just be like, yeah, okay, let's change this over to the Sarum rite. Like, we know you've never heard that. You don't even know what Sarum is. You've never heard that in your entire life. We're just going to celebrate this random Latin mass in this parish. And that's what's gonna really help you be the based and trad English Catholics. It's like, no, that's just not the purpose. Like, there's a place for that, but it's just not the Ordinariate. That's not what the Ordinariate does. That's not what the Ordinariate ever should do. I would be very disappointed if the Ordinariate ever started doing things like that.
Yeah, I don't have any real strong opinions, except for I see value in the Anglican Ordinariate. It is unfortunate there are no Anglican Ordinariates in my area. I've never been able to witness the liturgy. It seems to me that it's mostly on the borders of the United States, is in the United States where the Ordinariate really exists. In the East Coast, Florida, Texas, California, and up that. Sort of, to me, it seems like the Midwest is kind of left absent for the most part.
Yeah. With that, if anybody ever wants to, like, just if they're curious after this interview and they just want to listen to like an Ordinariate mass, the best one is if you go up and look Anglicanorum Cedibus Society, and then Anglicanorum, it should pop up, but it's Anglican and then ORUM, and then Cedibus is COETIBUS. If you look at the Anglicanorum Cedibus Society, they have matins and evensong in the Anglican tradition, which is like our morning and evening prayer. It's just called matins and evensong. And then solemn mass and thanksgiving for Anglicanorum Cedibus. Those are all just like fantastic masses to watch, and it just shows forth the best of the Ordinariate tradition.
Yeah. Do you think that also part of this was Benedict XVI wanting a revival of the liturgy, him introducing the Anglican Ordinariate into the church?
Yeah, if you read Anglicanorum Cedibus, the document, I think it's very clear that Benedict XVI thought that the Ordinariate could eventually provide certain correctives or supplements to the Novus Ordo to help them with, because like if you just like admit it, like Anglicans, like even when you go to like the Anglican mass in like the gayest sort of possible parish you can think of in the Episcopal Church, like their chorus sounds great. Like you go like to one of the Church of England parishes where they have like some lesbian priest in Tridentine vestments. Like even while like they have no faith, like they still have like a very good liturgy, which should probably say something about what the difference between a pretty liturgy and then a good liturgy. It's a pretty liturgy, to be clear. So Anglicans, they're actually like, even like small, like 30 people Anglican Ordinariate masses that I've been to, they're just fantastic. They'll have like 25 people and they'll still manage to like get enough people to do polyphony. Like, come on, man, that's insane. Then you'll have like this parish of like, I don't know, 5,000 families, this Novus Ordo parish with 5,000 families, and they can't find one cantor to like cant properly the propers. So yeah, to be honest, like when you look at the Ordinariate, they're able to retain the reforms of Vatican II, because if you're being perfectly honest with yourself, when you look at the reforms in the Anglican liturgy that happened in the 70s, a lot of it was influenced by the reforms of the Roman Rite that happened in the Novus Ordo. So accepting the good out of the reforms that happened from Vatican II, that's something very important. Providing the sort of traditional English beauty of form, because to be honest, like the 16th, 17th century translators of English are a heck of a lot better than the modern day translators of English. Not necessarily in content, but they just knew the English language better, so they're able to provide a certain elevation of language, a certain clearness of expression that modern day translators they're just not able to do, and that's why like they sound sort of like a lot of modern day translations of hymns just sound sort of dorky. Or if you read like John Mason Neal, for example, he was a 19th century Anglo-Catholic. Like his translations of hymns, they're classics. Everybody knows them. Like it's they're very good, and nobody could like replace them with a new translation because everybody would just think that the other one just sounded terrible because that's just how good they were with translation. So I think this could be very very helpful with the Novus Ordo applying the reforms of Vatican II without a lot of the cringe. While rejecting a lot of the cringe ways in which they have been applied. So we definitely do need to distinguish between the what Vatican II intended and then what happened, because those are two very, very different things.
Yeah. And also, it's interesting you bring up language and the use of language and how, sort of how it was translated. Yves Lenoir, when he was during the middle of Vatican II happening, and before the Novus Ordo, he basically said there are two ways that they're going to go about making an English-speaking mass. It's either going to be sort of archaic language, like beautiful and poetic, sort of archaic language, or sort of the, I guess, the boring, sort of
dull contemporary English that's like
yeah.
very that's the thing is we look at the way in which English is sort of used now is like where do we sort of ourselves find the way in which we speak English, the way in which we which is opposed to like the 19th century educational system, which if you read any sort of grammar book of English grammar in the 19th century, it's very clear. There are certain authorities of the English language that teach how to speak proper English. These would be like Cranmer in the Book of Common Prayer, the KJV, Shakespeare, Milton, like all authors like this who are from the traditional period of the English language in its formative period. These are authorities on how you speak English well, how you write English well. And this was something which they focused on. They're like, okay, we want to speak proper English. We want to write proper English. This is how it has to be done. And this is actually, I think was something very important for me and something that I definitely would like to give my kids is that a lot of times the way in which I interacted with the Bible growing up was the King James Version, which I think might have influenced a little bit of my choice towards Anglicanism. But what you look at nowadays is like, okay, what do we view as an authority for English? Really, it's either entertainment or commercial. And of course, back then it was entertainment as well. Like Shakespeare was entertainment, but it was entertainment that was not only in matter but also in the form of the way in which words were spoken. So now, like we have a very economical sort of way of speaking that's very, I think, very gross. It's like it's almost like you're like prostituting language, I guess would be the best way of putting it. You're like you're abusing language, and you're just kind of like using language. You're not like you don't have any regard for language qua language. So like it ends up just being like it just kind of wants to get an idea across but doesn't know how to because like when you listen to like a very good speaker, I guess this is the best way I can give an analogy for people who might have trouble understanding what I'm saying. When you listen to a very good speaker, and I just stand up here and I'm just like, okay, well, after you die, God is going to judge you. And then on the other hand, I could say like upon your death, the face of God's wrath will come before you and will consume you with the fire of 10,000 suns. And you will be cast into the lake of fire to be tormented by demons. Like I said basically the same thing, but the way in which I said it, even like the tone of my voice, the type of language that I used, like the using metaphor and using very vivid imagery, it changes the way in which it's perceived. You're better able to understand the sort of what I'm trying to say just by the way in which I say it, and that's why the way in which we translate liturgy is so important. It's really the liturgical translators are as important. People don't recognize this, but the liturgical translators are as important as those who are writing the liturgical documents. They're just as important because you can absolutely remove one of the emphases of the liturgy if you just translate it in a certain way. Like you can translate the passages about hell, for example, or judgment in a very benign way, and then people aren't really going to be impacted by it. But if you write it in a way which is very stern, very strong, is able to raise the mind by the very form of words to what it means, what it is attempting for you to contemplate, then yeah, you're going to be able to understand what it's saying a lot better.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. There, you can basically have somebody who is going to tell you the exact same thing, but in the most dull and uh, inoffensive manner, and you're not really going to. It's not really going to go into your soul. It's not really going to consume you fully, but and then that creates a very lackluster liturgy, and that can be very dangerous. And that's not seen in the Anglican Ordinariate, from what
Mm.
I can understand.
Yeah, they because it's not really like an even like a strictly ordinariate thing. It's just because of the just because the way in which like it could be anybody really, like even read like Methodist sermons, or you read like Baptist sermons from the 19th century, or the type of translations they did in the 19th century. It's just like people were taught English in a different way that just makes it better for these things. It doesn't even have to, like, a lot of people are like, oh, you just want to bring back like the these, the thous, the thys, the cometh and goeth, and such, but not even really like those traditional markers of English. You can remove those and still have like a um, very powerful English language translation. You don't really need to have like the markers of tradition.
Gotcha. Now, we talked a little bit about what would be the difference, or what you might see at an ordinary parish versus Novus Ordo or TLM. But are there any other things that, like, sort of would be dramatically different, or something maybe we should take interest in on what we can learn from an ordinary parish?
Um, yeah, besides, I think it's a vastly superior sort of pastoral relationship. Because of the way in which, um, like most Novus Ordo parishes are seen are like sacrament sort of stores that you kind of are able to just like do the whole thing and go there and pick up your sacraments and then leave. Um, I like to be perfectly honest. I mean, Anglicans can have the opposite problem, which is basically making the church a glorified social club. But hey, at least you like social club's a little bit better than merely like your sacrament store.
A vendor.
You're getting a little bit like it's like a sacrament dispensary sort of thing. Is you go and you pick up your sacraments, and you're able to go and then come back for your pill next week or whatever. That so when it comes to the pastoral approach of actually knowing closely your priest and those people who you're sitting next to, I think that's good. I won't even I won't I won't even comment on the whole celibacy versus non-celibacy debate. I think that is the at least the ordinary in America has, and Bishop Lopes has been very clear that celibacy is still our practice. The only reason why non-celibacy is allowed among certain priests is for pastoral reasons. So that's already been decided, and I'm not going to disagree with my bishop on that. And I think that's just from the logic of the teaching of the church for especially the last 500 years. So also, yeah, the liturgy stuff is vastly important. But other, I guess also we can talk about like the sort of apostolic spirit of the ordinariate. The ordinariate, like I said in the beginning, I think I said it a while ago, but like every single person you talk to, the ordinariate, it's like, yeah, I have like these 3 other like groups of people at this one parish that I also brought to the ordinariate, and they have each one of those have these 2 other people that they brought to the ordinariate. It's just like they're very, very good with their apostolic spirit. But the biggest point, and one that I don't think I've emphasized enough, is the way in which the ordinariate brings in the Anglican relationship to the divine office. Is you actually get, and I mean I've stayed with these people at their houses for periods of time, but like it's average for an ordinariate household for them to pray morning and evening prayer together. That's like a normal thing, and even like some of them will just like do the whole, like not just like read it, but they'll do the whole like chanting and also the like liturgical measures and such like that. But the bringing back of the practice of the divine office, both parochially, so in your parish, and then also in families. Very, very, very important. I can't stress enough how important and how impactful it would be for families to just start praying the divine office together. It doesn't even take that long. People are kind of babies about it sometimes, but like you can go to if anybody's interested in like looking at how it goes, prayer.covert, so covrt.org, prayer.covert.org. That has from the North American Divine Office, it has the how do I put it? Like the office lined up for you out there. And then it has like you start out with a sentence of scripture, then you go to like a confession of sin, and then you go to like various psalms and scripture readings. Actually, you become very familiar with scripture after this. And if you ever get a physical copy, which my physical copy is in the living room, so I don't have it on me right now. If you ever get a physical copy, you can read in the beginning where it shows you how, if you are short on time, you can actually like edit it to make it a bit shorter. So really, if you're like editing it to make it shorter, it should only take you in the morning and evenings like 20 minutes to pray morning and evening prayer together. It doesn't take that long. And you're reading through the Psalms very frequently. You're reading through most of the Bible, doing that. Actually, not most of the Bible, but basically the entire New Testament, and then a good chunk of the important passages in the Old Testament. But it's like, yeah, it's I think that would be one of the good practices of the ordinariate that should be brought into the wider Roman Rite as practice of the office.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about it as families doing it, but that's really interesting together. I don't know. Is that did that like where does that go back to? How long ago was it where families were doing the divine office? Or
that was since the time of Cranmer, really, because you have and there's an interesting I can't remember his name, but there's an interesting lecture on like the history behind the divine office in the Book of Common Prayer, and you get in sort of Renaissance culture. It became kind of popular for people to outside of monasteries say the divine office because they were literate. They could, so they would get breviaries and they would say the divine office. And usually what would happen is, because these people weren't monks, they had other things to do, they started forming these breviaries that were shortened for these people. And unfortunately, secular priests, it never hit monasteries, but secular priests, which just means priests who aren't in monasteries, but they're in parochial settings, they were like, well, we kind of want shorter offices too. So they started using these shortened versions of offices that were meant for laymen. And then eventually, from these actually arose the office that was added into the Book of Common Prayer, which is very simplified. Really no propers, only readings, a selection of the Psalms that's basically just read through the Psalter rather than having anything special about the days or seasons. The only thing that really changes is the collect, which is the prayer at the end. Very, very short, very simple. You can teach like a 7-year-old to pray the office, which has its advantages. For sure, but the issue is the priests. The priests were just like, okay, this is our only obligation, is basically praying for that certain amount of time, and then they wouldn't be celebrating daily mass or anything. So yeah, it's like with the Roman priests, you'd have like hours and hours of vocal prayer a day, because they'd usually be praying their divine office, something like the rosary, and then also they'd be having their daily mass that they'd have to say. So hours of vocal prayer a day. But Anglican clergy, it was like, I don't know, you have your 30 minutes of vocal prayer a day if you're lucky. See, that was quite damaging, but it was very good for laymen because you would have educated laymen would be able to pray with their families as morning and evening prayer, or even certain communities would be able to come together and pray morning and evening prayer together. So it wasn't exactly the worst thing that could have been invented. I think it was actually a very good invention, and I think we actually have a similar thing that happened with the Novus Ordo. With the Liturgy of the Hours, unfortunately, is they decided to like dumb it down for use of laity, which was a good thing. But like when it came to your priests, unfortunately, they kind of were shortchanged on their duty, which caused a lot of them to just like not do it at all.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any like drive for certain saints to come out of the Ordinariate? Are there any like, well, obviously non-canonized saints that the Ordinariate is pushing for, or
So
at least the laymen are pushing for?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think this is what distinguishes us from Eastern Catholicism. Is Eastern Catholicism, they have a very hard time of recognizing their schism, and being humble and penitent about their schism. But when it comes to the Ordinariate, there isn't as much this difficulty, at least in the American Ordinariate. I know in the UK, a lot of them have more liberal views of the schism. But yeah, we're not. I know there's some people who are a member of Saint Charles, King and Martyr, and there's some sort of devotion to Saint Charles, King and Martyr, which he was killed by Presbyterians. I know there's some sort of devotion there, but like I've never really seen any sort of serious push to canonize post schism Anglican clergy or laymen.
Gotcha. What about What about English or sort of Anglicans that,
Like like pre-schism Anglicans,
or just even, or like return people who returned? Any
Yeah, it's been so the pastoral provision, which was first from Anglican Ordinariate Chadibus, was in the 70s. So I guess we could have people who died long enough to go to do that, but I can't think of any in particular that that this has happened with.
Is there any sort of major differences in the calendar, or interesting things about the calendar that
Yeah, there is actually, because we have a calendar which focuses more strongly on the saints of the UK. So we there's a lot of blesseds that are included in our calendar, and even some saints that are included in our calendar that aren't celebrated in the Novus Ordo. And then also our ordinary time is still retained as Sundays after Trinity. So Trinity Tide is still retained in the Ordinariate. I can't think of any other like major sort of differences besides that.
so it's Trinity Tide, not after Pentecost?
Yeah, so this is interesting because there's actually like sort of a battle within Anglicanism, and then also like the Romanizing Anglicans versus like the true Anglicans. Is traditionally we talk about Trinity Tide. We don't talk about Whitsuntide because technically it's not Pentecost in the Anglican Ordinariate. It's Whitsunday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is I just call it Pentecost. But
But
yeah, it's
in
Whit
the
Sunday.
in the traditional Lenten Mass, it's still referred to as Whit Sunday.
Really, that might be that's interesting because I know in English speaking countries because if you think about it, I mean, like 50, 60 years ago, kids would get off for Whit Sunday. So in English speaking Catholic circles, I'm sure they just refer to it as Whit Sunday. This is a pre-Reformation sort of practice called Whit Sunday. But yeah, this leads to the interesting the interesting term Whitsuntide, because we talk about like Trinity Tide and we talk about a Passion Tide, but we have a Whitsuntide, which is a very fun word to say. So yeah, there's this sort of battle because technically, like in the Roman Rite, they usually talk about it as Pentecost, Sundays after Pentecost, but in traditional Anglican fashion, they would talk about Sundays after Trinity, not Sundays after Pentecost. So if memory is serving me correct, which I'm sure it is, we still just retain the we retain our traditional practice, which is Sundays after Trinity.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of cool. And an interesting battle in in Anglican circles between the two sides. And is that kind of something that kind of persists, sort of this sort of Romanizing factions versus Anglicanizing factions in some sense, or holding to Anglican?
I'd have to. Yeah, I guess there's because you have the whole thing. Yeah, I just checked, so I was right. It is Sundays after Trinity. So I would like there's this whole thing with like Eastern Catholicism where they're just like terrified to death of like Latinization. They're just like they shake over it and they're terrified of Latinization. Like, oh, our tradition, if we don't like do this like very obscure thing that the laymen don't even notice, we're like actually Latinized and it's terrible. Which I personally think some Latinization is good, even within the Ordinariate, because there's some local apostolic practices that just ought not to be done, because they're either from later corruptions or they we can, like, for example, we got rid of the apostolic practice of the Quartodeciman, celebration of Easter. Like, it's okay to get rid of these things because they can cause trouble. But yeah, when it comes to like Latinization, like is there like an Anglican complaint towards Latinization? I don't think so. I've never really encountered it much, and the reason I think so is because in the late 19th century with the ritualist movement, they really provided a good synthesis. And throughout the early 20th century, they provided that good synthesis. And then you have just like they annoy like these guys that are the guys that are just like really like into liturgy. Those guys are usually like the most annoying to me as like an ordinariate member, because they'll just be like, oh, you didn't like take this reform from like John Mason Neal that like 3 people in the world know about. How are we ever going to be able to worship God? Like, how are we going to be able to do it? Like, is our masses even valid anymore? And it's just they complain. They're like, oh, the North American prayer book is just so terrible. No, this is just so terrible. Nah, that's just so terrible. They're just annoying, to be honest. Like you get the guys that are kind of a bit gay about it. And yeah, it's whatever. I usually just make fun of them, and nobody pays attention to them, because yeah, it's a you have to recognize it's a pastoral. The ordinary is a pastoral provision. None of these laymen give one crap about whatever was written about in the liturgical reform 100 years ago. We kind of just care about what errors that we have in the Anglican liturgy that was being used before we converted, and then we care about fixing those errors. That's really all we care about. So there's no like complaints of Latinization or complaints of this or that when it comes to that.
Okay, awesome.
So
Yeah.
Grandma said Sunday after Trinity, so we say Sunday after Trinity. Really, we don't care. We don't care about whatever happened. But the history behind why we say Trinity tide and other people say Whitsuntide. We don't care about that. It's whatever Grandma said and whatever we grew up saying, because it's pastoral provisions. Who cares about all of these like autistic details? Like it's like just get a life. Like the sort of just get a life, man. Stop focusing on these things. They don't matter really, and nobody cares about them. Literally, you and like your 3 friends are the only people that care about them.
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
Okay. Well, on that note, so is there anything that you want to promote or anything upcoming on your channel that people should look forward to?
Yeah, I'm right in the middle of a series on the life of St. Thomas, and then I'm also going to be doing a series soon on the Filioque from Denis Petavius, who was a Jesuit in the 17th century. But yeah, I just do scholastic stuff. If you're interested in like serious stuff, I do that. If you're interested in like basic catechetical stuff, I'm going through St. Thomas's like catechetical works, his works on the Apostles' Creed, 10 Commandments, Lord's Prayer. They're very simple, easy for laymen. I think they provide a very good an easy like intro into his works. Rather than just diving into something like, oh, let's dive into his commentary on the sentences. Like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. So yeah, I do that. And then if you like the sort of like live stream, live Q&A type thing, Hassan and I, if any of you know who Hassan is, he's a friend of mine. Every Saturday morning we do a Saturday morning stream where you can just do Q&A stuff if that's what you like watching. So yeah, I do a few different types of things that should be appealing to a wider range of people.
Awesome. That's great. I'll have links to hopefully everything that we mentioned in the video, so it's easy to find. So thank you all for watching. Christian, thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure talking to you. For anyone interested or anyone who wants to sort of follow more of my content, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Help us beat the algorithm. And God bless everyone.